and and so this week, today actually, news came out about Ferguson. The Justice Department has found levels and just accounts of civil rights violations in the city of Ferguson, systematic civil rights violations in the city of Ferguson. And a report came out today from the Department of Justice stating that Ferguson Police Department disproportionately subjected African Americans to excessive police force, that they use baseless traffic stops and citations. Citations as petty as walking down the middle of the street, jaywalking, disproportionately so against the African American community. Now, keep in mind that Ferguson is 1/3 white, and the report found out that the crime statistics basically suggest that only blacks, 1/3 white, but the crime statistics state that primarily blacks are the culprits or the perpetrators of crime. 90% of traffic tickets were issued to African Americans. So not only are we criminal, but we can't drive. 93% of arrests, African American. 95% of jaywalking arrest, not just tickets, but jaywalking arrest, African American. And so it gives this appearance that even though Ferguson is 1/3 white, that all of the crime, all of the petty crimes, not just significant crimes, but misdemeanors, traffic violations, all of the traffic violations in the city of Ferguson were perpetrated only by African Americans. And the Justice Department said that something was going on. And after a 6-month investigation, they have found that there was systematic discrimination. There were systematic abuses of police force targeted against African Americans. And so the part that I read that stood out the most to me was about the traffic violations, the traffic violations, particularly for jaywalking. They actually said in this statement that Ferguson disproportionately arrested African Americans for jaywalking, and that reminded me of the reason, the real reason that Darren Wilson stopped Michael Brown in the first place. It was because he was walking in the middle of the road. And it's funny that the Department of Justice used that exact same language that people were being arrested for something as petty as, quote, walking in the middle of the road. So I think they were trying to send a message to us. The message I got loud and clear was that Darren Wilson was just going along with the normal order of things, stopping people for jaywalking in a town. Now, jaywalking in a town, in a city like New York City, something totally different than jaywalking in a city with a population of about 20,000 people. 20,000 people in the city of Ferguson. So jaywalking there is not the same as jaywalking, yet 95% of all jaywalking arrests were African American. The New York Times put out an article today talking about the climate. It's not just the targeting and the disproportionate attention, if you want to use that phrase, to say it nicely. The disproportionate attention given to African Americans by the Ferguson Police Department was not just the only thing that stood out in this investigation. It was I think the New York Times used the word ingrained racism. Racism was so ingrained in the system that they were so callous as to use government official emails to send racist jokes. For instance, November 2008 email, a city of Ferguson official said that Barack Obama would not be president long because, quote, what black man holds a steady job for 4 years? This was a city official sending an email using city official designated email. This was not a personal email that someone hacked. This shows you that they were so comfortable with their level of racism that they could joke through email chains, knowing full well that someone could find out about it, but they trusted every level of the system they trusted it enough to not think that anyone in the system was going to rat on them, but it was only with the exposure that came down from the Department of Justice. That shows you the level of racism that was baked into the system that is the city of Ferguson. So they made a joke about President Obama and no black man being able to hold a job, right? The next one was they sent cartoons through email with African Americans depicted as monkeys. And then the third one was they sent an email describing black women having abortions as a way to curb crime, as a crime reduction plan, that black women should have abortions. This should tell you, so it's one thing to, let me go on a segue here. It's one thing to joke in the privacy of your own home. It's one thing to joke with your circle of peers that you don't think anyone is going to hear you. But everyone who lives in the 21st century should know and is fully aware of that your emails for businesses, and especially for government officials, are accessible by your higher-ups and they're accessible by the general public. But they trusted their good old boy system so much that they were comfortable, city officials were comfortable sending emails with racist-filled jokes. In Ferguson, blacks were more likely to be searched than white drivers, even though they were less likely to be found with illegal substances. This was another finding by the Department of Justice. African American, but see, this statistic we knew. We know this statistic from New York, that stop and frisk, they will stop and investigate and frisk African American men, but they were less likely to be found with any illegal substances. Same thing in Ferguson. Drivers, African American drivers, were stopped and searched more frequently, but they were less likely to be caught with contraband, was the word that New York Times used. So Mayor James Knowles III gets on television during the riots and during the protests, rather, in Ferguson, and he says that Ferguson is a great place. We don't have any racial problems, any racism in Ferguson. But according to the statistics, according to the research and the investigation, rather, by the Department of Justice, not only was racism so baked into your system that you felt free to joke with your colleagues with racist jokes, but you systematically targeted African Americans, so much so that now the Department of Justice is poised to bring a lawsuit against the city of Ferguson. That should let you know. That should let you know the context and the framework that Darren Wilson was operating in for years. We do know the results of this investigation shows that the city of Ferguson has been and probably continues to be a very racist city. Documented. This is documented. They didn't even have the common sense, the common courtesy, the self-preservation enough to not use racism in their government official emails. That lets you know the environment of Ferguson. That lets you know the mindset of the employees of Ferguson, of which Darren Wilson was one. And all it took for us to find this out, all this took was the death and the life of Michael Brown. Someone had to die for us to find out how corrupt and how bankrupt, morally bankrupt, the city of Ferguson is. And it makes me think, what if the Department of Justice was proactive instead of reactive? What if the Department of Justice regularly took a random sample of police departments across the nation and investigated them? If they had investigated Ferguson before Michael Brown was killed, Michael Brown would likely not have been killed. Because one, the disproportionate stopping and arresting of African-American people for jaywalking, which was the reason Darren Wilson stopped him in the first place, would have been addressed. And Darren Wilson probably would have drove right by Michael Brown jaywalking like he would have driven right by a white person jaywalking. So if this had been taken care of before, if the Department of Justice was proactive instead of reactive, then Michael Brown probably would be alive today. And here's another thing. Here's the thing. Crime statistics, crime statistics are a self-fulfilling prophecy. And by that I mean, if the police target black people because of statistics, then black Americans will be disproportionately represented in crime statistics, which circularly is going to bring and make police officers feel justified in targeting African Americans because of those same statistics. It's circular. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a never-ending cycle because they use biased statistics, which give no insight to the reasons and the causes of crime in the first place. All they are used for is to justify the racial profiling of African Americans. And then because African Americans are disproportionately targeted, we show up in the criminal statistics in a disproportionate way, which fills the prophecy. Police look at those same statistics and say, now we are justified in looking at African Americans. So when I saw these statistics come out, all I could think of was the fact that they have been doing this for years, targeting African American people disproportionately so, even though we are less likely to be caught with something illegal, which means if they stopped white people or non-blacks at an increased rate, they are more likely to find criminal activity. But instead, they focus on African Americans, and we see the result is that African Americans are disproportionately represented in the criminal statistics. And the result of that is that Americans generally view African Americans through the lens of criminality because of biased statistics.